Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of CoachesCorner.health. I am one of your co-hosts. I'm Leslie Gadet, mindset and emotional awareness coach. But because it won't all fit in there, I figured I'd just shorten it a bit. I help my clients around self awareness and emotional triggers because we know a lot of the time if we get into the emotions, it can steal our time. So I help my clients become more self aware around those moments so they make better decisions in their responses, allowing them to keep themselves on track. Andy, over to you.
Yes, I thank you, Leslie. I'm Andy. I am the unconditional coach. I've also been leaning lately into the boundaries coach, which is actually something I've been doing for a very, very long time. I've just been kind of skirting the subject, and I've decided recently to lean into that particular subject, as you and I have actually talked about a couple of times. Um, so yeah, I help people just figure out what boundaries actually do, what boundaries can actually do for their lives, and how they can help. So thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm looking forward to this conversation. This is something that popped up on my Facebook a few weeks ago now. On one of my friends shared it, and they said generous people have to have harder boundaries or more strict boundaries so that they don't get used, or some version of that statement, and I can't remember exactly what they said, but they basically they were saying that generous people have weaker boundaries, and they were asking for input and feedback on that. Which, being the boundaries coach, I jumped all over it and said, actually, what makes them generous is their boundaries. It's generous people don't have weaker boundaries; they just have less strict boundaries. They're not trying to protect themselves as much as serve or help or be of service. Um, so that doesn't make them necessarily weaker. It makes them it makes them more vulnerable to being used for sure. And if you're worried about being used, question whether or not you're actually generous. Because are you giving because you want to give, or are you giving because you feel you have to, or are you being generous because you think it's the right thing to do? True generosity comes from overflow, comes from abundance, comes from a place of I have enough and can give you some too, of whatever that is, whether it's money or love or some commodity, or some emotion, some support. Um, Generosity comes from abundance. So if you're being abundant, are you really worried about being used? Because if it's extra anyway, if you don't really need it to fill your cup up, then are you actually being used? What's the definition then? Because now that becomes a judgment. So there's a whole lot in that first statement that I just said to unpack. So let's get into conversation.
Yeah. Whoa. Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm in agreement with you. I think that you really have to take a look at the question you're asking yourself. If you feel that someone is being weak or needs stronger boundaries, if they're really a kind person and they're giving,
Yeah.
I typically think that most people who are giving of their time, giving of their energy, usually are already in that mindset. They understand that they have their own boundaries, that they do fill their cup on a daily basis. But I think where that would probably lean more into is perhaps the person who's asking that question is wondering if they're being too nice in the
Yes.
time that they're giving. Not necessarily that they are generous people, but maybe they're feeling like, well, maybe they're in the thought process of, oh, people are always taking from me. And they're looking
Yes.
at it from that way. We both talked about leading into being more service based in how we approach life, and we understand that there's going to be times where we're going to feel like a little bit of our energy is drained, but we also understand how to get ourselves back on track. We're also not asking ourselves the question, am I being used because I'm giving of myself? Because we don't
Right.
we don't approach it that way. So I
We don't
love
see it that way. Yeah.
yeah, so I love how you're starting this conversation off. So I am like ready to get into it. Let's do it.
Well, and that's my exact thought is if you're feeling used, that means there is a transaction that you feel is lopsided. There is a reciprocation. You believe you want something back from them they're not giving you. And is that real generosity at that point? For example, a lot of people feel used in romantic relationships when one person feels they're doing most of the work, either whether it's housework or providing the cash, like providing the income, or taking care of the kids or providing more of the love in the relationship, or one person is doing more of the work. And often in those relationships, both sides feel that. Oftentimes, one side might feel I'm providing all the income, and the other side might feel I'm providing all the love to the relationship, all the emotional support. And it's just a matter of what they value. And when we feel used, it's because we're looking for something we're not getting in return for the thing we're giving. And that's why I said in my original statement, ask yourself, is that real generosity? Are you actually giving just to give, which is generosity?
Mm-hmm.
If you're giving just because you see someone who can use something you have and you have extra of that thing, then where's the loss? If you throw it to the wind or give it to this person, where's the loss? Right? If that's where you're coming from, then that's generosity. Because you can give and you can throw it to the wind or you can give it to this person. The consequences to you are the same. Now, if you're looking for something in return, that's where we often feel used. And this is what you were saying a minute ago. You and I often don't feel used because we give of our overflow. And yes, sometimes we feel low energy, but we also know it's our responsibility to refill that energy. We know where, and sometimes we don't know where, so we rely on each other and the rest of our support groups. Right? Sometimes we might not know exactly how to recharge the energy, but we do know who we can go to help get that answer. Right? We have some people, we have some places, we have some tools. So the key there is we know it's our responsibility. You're not going to help me refill my cup if you don't know that my cup's empty. Right? My spouse, my girlfriend, my partner might not do the same thing. My business partners, my coworkers and colleagues won't do the same thing. It'll be the same situation regardless of what style of relationship it is. And that's where I think we approach this conversation sometimes from a transactional space. I'm giving, and I'm giving because I want to get. And usually we're not doing that consciously. We're not saying, I want to give you because I think you deserve it. We're not saying that and then going, oh, but I want something back. Where it comes from is we're feeling it. We're feeling a lack. We're feeling a space, an emptiness, a failure to reciprocate, a failure to return the favor. I've given you all this. Why haven't you given me the thing I asked for that I really want?
Yeah.
Maybe I haven't even asked for it.
Yeah, and I just want to actually touch on that because you said this is great because here's a little secret I want to let people in on. And I think most people aren't thinking about this because, well, first of all, you touched on the not asking, but sometimes, just so you know, so that you're not like going through life racking your brain trying to figure this out, it's really super simple. I'll just break it down for you. Sometimes one person's going to be giving more than the other. I said it, it's the truth because that's just the nature of the game. Partly too, because there's not that conversation being had. Like, hey, I've noticed that, I've been really giving a lot to this relationship. And I would really like to have a conversation around you of how I hoped this relationship would be. Like how we would give and take, how we would support each other. Because the other part that you might not know or might not be thinking about is we don't read minds. Oh my gosh, seriously. I'm like, I know, I'm sorry if I'm being like sarcastic, but it's
But we don't.
it was something I actually had to like realize. Like,
Me too.
number one, sometimes there's one side that's getting more than the other. And the second one is they don't read your mind. They can't. It's impossible. Only you are up here. So if they can't read your mind, and there's always maybe going to be somebody that's going to be giving more than the other, then you're going to have to really actually dig deep and decide, what does this relationship mean to you? What are you willing to give? And what are you willing to be, to acknowledge and accept that this is the
Way
deal,
it is.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
As an example, my husband and I, we live a digital nomadic lifestyle, which means we move around. And in fact, since we've been married for 26 years, we have not really lived anywhere longer than 12 years.
Right.
So now, though, in our new lifestyle, we are moving around. So we're a few months in Canada, a few weeks in the States, a few months in Mexico. That's where I am right now. Next year or this coming fall, we're thinking of maybe spending time in Florida after going up to Canada for a few months. So we're all over the place. So, what does that mean in our dynamics of our family relationships? It means that we are doing more of the work of reaching out, because number
Yes.
one, people don't know where we are. And number two, I think it's just, I don't know if it's out of sight, out of mind, Andy, but I think it's like when you someone's not like right there, noticeable to you, you might like, not that you're saying, "Oh, I don't care about you," but you might not think, "Oh, I should reach out and see how Ray and
Right.
Leslie are doing," right?
Yeah.
Instead, because I've just known this pretty much my entire marriage, pretty much a lot of the time of my friendships, I'm usually the one that's reaching out to say, "Hey, how are you
Yeah.
doing?" And that would be like, "Oh my gosh, it's so great to hear from you. I was thinking about you." And we get into a conversation. So don't allow that to make you feel like you aren't important, or that other people are ignoring you on purpose, because sometimes it's just that one person is going to be doing more of the work on a
Yeah.
friendship, in a family relationship, maybe even in a romantic relationship, unless you want to create this kind of boundary where you actually ask and you say, "This is what I would like. This is,
Yeah.
because I care about you." But you
Yeah.
have to have those conversations because, again, they don't read minds.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's true. That's exactly true. First of all, you have to have the conversations because they don't read minds. And when you're having the conversations, practice getting it wrong, because most people don't know actually how to have those conversations very well. We're going to get it wrong a lot. We always do. And so when you get it wrong, let that be a good thing. Let that be a way for you to figure out, okay, well, this didn't quite work. Let's try it again. And help your partner do the same thing. Help the other person on the other end of the conversation, whether that's your mother, your uncle, your husband, your wife, your coworker, your boss, whoever it is, help them get back in the conversation too and say, look, we didn't get off very well last time, the last 3 times, the last 15 times, but I still want to try and have this conversation with you. This relationship's important to me. I want to figure out how to make this work. Let's try again and keep going. And the other thing I want to add to that, unless you have the conversation, you can't be equal. And even if you do, you're not going to think you're equal, because your priorities are not their priorities. There's two reasons for that, actually. Your priorities are not their priorities, and our brain is looking for the problem to solve, not the thing that's going well. So when I'm getting what I want and the other person isn't, I don't know it, because I'm not looking for their problems. I'm looking for mine. I don't see one there. Or when I'm getting most of what I want, but I'm not getting all of what I want, even if I'm getting 80% of what I want, but I'm not getting 20%, that 20% is going to be 80% of my attention, because our brain is designed to look at the things that aren't going the way we want them to. So even if you are getting 80% of what you want, your 80% of your attention is going to be on what you're not getting. And therefore, you're going to feel like you're only getting 20%. You're going to have this perception that you're not getting as much as you're giving, when you actually might be getting the 80% share. You might be getting the lion's share. You just don't know it, because that's not where our focus is. So in relationships, in any kind or any style of relationship, it's also important, like you said, to know that sometimes you're just going to be doing most of the work, because even when you're not, you're still going to think you are. Our brains are not wired to notice equality, because they're wired to protect ourself, our person, our individual. We have to train them to protect the relationship. We have to train them to protect the couple, the collaboration. We have to train that. And it takes a lot of external work. It takes a lot of conscious, intentional work. You and I have learned how to protect this collaboration, this friendship that we have. And it took a lot of work. Like, we had to put in effort to make that happen. And it didn't happen right away. And we still sometimes feel like I'm doing all the work, or you're doing all the work, right? We both have had both of those phrases. Because what I'm noticing now, that I'm focusing more on what I'm getting than what I'm wanting, I'm noticing that what I'm getting is more often the things that I can't do for myself or don't want to do for myself. And you happen to be good at a lot of those things. So I'm getting more of what I used to not get, or what I haven't been able to provide for myself. And that makes me feel a lot more secure in this collaboration, in this friendship. And most people don't think like that. This is something you and I have had to train ourselves to do. This is a natural thought process. So if you want to actually have your boundaries, if you want to actually look at your boundaries, if you want to have a conversation around boundaries, if you want to actually think who's generous, who's being used, understand that you're always going to think you're the one doing the most of the work. It's just the natural way the brain works. You're muted still. It's just the natural way the brain works. So when we want to have a transactional relationship, or what some people might call a reciprocal relationship, where there's some give and take, some equality, it's difficult to actually accomplish that, because um, the brain doesn't see equality. Like, our minds are not wired to see equality. They're wired to see problems. So it's difficult to see equality, right?
Yeah, I agree. And so, did I blank out for a minute there?
You did so, yeah.
So, as I said earlier, I'm in Mexico. They've been having some technical difficulties with their internet, and it's been going on the entire week. So, I apologize if I do go in and out. Andy is more than capable of carrying this on his own, but I obviously want to be here to support him. So,
Yeah.
one of the things I love is that it's so true about how our friendship, we have learned to create these boundaries without actually having to have conversations around it. And I think because we talk about this type of
Stuff.
stuff all the time, we are just conscious or subconsciously creating them within our friendship. But
Yeah.
boundaries are, again, because I mean, this is your expertise and this is your area. And I understand how important boundaries are, because boundaries actually set the relationship on a positive, rather
Yes.
than, and I think people just, because I used to be the girl that would thought, oh, boundaries meant that I'm putting something in place where you're not going to do this anymore. That stopping someone else from you know whether it's emotionally harming me, whether it's physically harming me, in some way where it physically harms my space, whatever that is. And I always looked at boundaries that way. And I didn't realize until really getting into the self development world, and more so in our conversations, that boundaries really are meant to create that better way of communicating with each other, uh,
Yes.
and being able to have, even being more respectful of yourself and the things that you do for yourself, and holding yourself accountable to the things you say you're going to do, whether that's like your self-care. And so I really love just what I have learned in our relationship and our collaboration. And truly, I'm loving this conversation, because I think both of us are really, really giving of our time to our clients, to our
Yeah.
communities, and we do share. We sometimes, I think, maybe go over and above, and that's not and I'm not saying that to, toot
Right.
our horn or anything, but it's because it's in our makeup of who we
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
We will do that. We'll go that extra step.
Yeah.
You were saying that there was things that you don't like to do that I just automatically take over and do, and there's other things that I'm thinking, well, he's brilliant at that, so we have we just
Yes.
like, you do this, I do that, and it's like there's an understanding around it, but there's no like animosity around it. There's no like, I feel like you're taking advantage and it's all one sided. It's like, no, we are actually equally bringing to this dynamic in
Yeah.
a way that helps both of us. And I think like in any relationship, whether it's romantic, whether it's friendship, whether it's business, family, it's just learning how to start having the conversation around what you need and what you want. Not so much the expectations, because I think expectations become too I centered and not about, including the other party, but really making sure you have those conversations. Because if you want something in your relationship to be a certain way, unless you speak up, the other person's going to have absolutely no idea. And they're going to just assume that, hey, the way things are going is the way things are going and you're good with it. So it's
Yeah.
just, getting clear on that. And so that I love that. And also the second piece to that is, you wrote in the description about how strong people are really vulnerable and they connect with gentleness rather than having to have stronger boundaries. Again, that is just having that awareness around their own personal space,
Yeah.
what they allow and what they won't. Again, we do, both of us have boundaries in place where, they are hard boundaries, but they're not hard boundaries meant to keep people away. It's boundaries for our own well being. And I
Yeah.
think any human being should have them. I think any
Yeah.
human being that has strong boundaries for themselves, for their emotional well being, is going to be more well rounded in their connections with other humans and in the world. And so I really like that you put that in there because, again, we also are very vulnerable in our shares sometimes when we are,
Yes.
whether we're collaborating on here or we're in our own coaches calls, we allow each other inside to the world
Yes.
that we are inhabiting up here. So
Yes.
we
Yeah.
let you in here. We let you
Yeah.
see what's behind the veil so that we
Yes.
get a better understanding of each other and we're able
Yeah.
to help each other there. So it's just, but again, it's speaking up because if I didn't tell you some of my things, my hangups, you would have no idea, and vice versa. And
Right.
we wouldn't
And
have this collaboration.
that's right. And that's right. And it started fairly early on in our interactions in our relationship. We were part of a group, and we were all kind of sharing together, and we were all, being, carefully, cautiously vulnerable. We were sharing some parts of ourselves that we felt safe to share, and as we felt more and more comfortable sharing those things, and there was no betrayal and no, misuse of trust, and we just kind of gradually built that more and more over time, and eventually we got to the point where we could share some fairly intimate stuff that maybe I've shared with other people, but not every other person. There's, and then as you and I started building this collaboration together, just the two of us, we shared even more deep stuff that we've only shared with select other people, like very, very small selection of other people. And that's where the vulnerability creates the strength. The I wanted to go back a moment to, you were talking about the boundaries. Sometimes we do have hard boundaries. All of us have hard boundaries. We do need to have those hard boundaries that are in place to protect us from harm. And when I'm teaching boundaries, I call those barriers. They need to protect us. They're designed to protect us, and we need to have those, right? And this is what I think most people are using when they put up boundaries. They're putting up these barriers to protect them from harm, and they're valid. You have a serial killer living next door, you should put up a barrier between you and that person, right? There should be some protection there. You're not going to just go be vulnerable and, give them your kids to look after for a weekend while you go off to Vegas. That's just not how it works, right? As funny as that might sound.
Oh, Andy, love it.
But that's the idea of, like, we do need to have boundary or barriers. We do need to have those hard boundaries. And what I teach as boundaries are much softer. They're about choice. They give you choice. They give the other people involved choice. The whole point of what I teach boundaries to be is They're designed to give the other person the choice as to whether or not they cross your boundaries or honor them. And that all that changes is your actions. There is not necessarily any consequences for them one way or the other. They might not like your actions, but those actions are not designed to be consequences. They're designed to help you fill your own cup, right? If I put a boundary around, oh, I don't know, um, I don't want to create the thumbnails for our videos. If I put a boundary that now we haven't, we've just kind of slid into that role. But if I put a boundary around that, I might say, I don't want to create the thumbnails for these videos, and um, and therefore I'm going to ask you to create those thumbnails. And what I might do is I might say, okay, if you create these thumbnails, I'll say thank you. I will engage more in our collaboration. I'll um, be more respectful of the other things you don't like to do. Right? Those are three different things that I can do. Say thank you, engage more, and do more of the things that you don't like to do. Participate. And if you don't create those thumbnails, I might choose to engage less. I might make less suggestions about which videos we watch or which videos we create. I might I might just engage less. I might just become less invested in this collaboration. And those aren't direct consequences to you. I'm not trying to punish you. I'm just trying to fill my cup because if I'm not getting out what I want out of the relationship, then I'm going to fill my own cup some other way, right? And I use that example because we've slid into that. It was never a conversation we really had to have. We kind of had half a conversation kind of in 30 seconds one time, but we really didn't talk about it much at all because you just like that part and I like the other part, right? And so I'm using that because we already have made that decision, and because it's a fairly light and inconsequential conversation. But it's an example of how I set boundaries. Now you can choose freely whether or not you make those fun thumbnails. It has no consequences to me of whether or not you do, but it gives you the choice, and you feel you have the choice. You don't just always have to do them. If you ask me to do them, I'm sure you'd feel free to do so, and I'm sure I would do them. Um, And I also have choice in how I react, whether you do or whether you don't. So it gives both sides choice. That's different than hard boundaries. Those are soft boundaries. Those are what I teach as actually boundaries. Because what I teach as boundaries is boundaries can be crossed freely. Anybody can cross them. There might be some change in my actions when they cross them, but those aren't going to be as a consequence to that person. They just might be to fill my cup up in a different way, right? So to that point, generous people use more of those soft boundaries. We do have more boundaries that allow us to be vulnerable because I can say what I want and have the freedom to let you give it to me or not give it to me. And whatever you do is okay with me. Like I'm not going to have some sort of temper tantrum if you cross my boundary, right? I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to have the conversation the way I want. I'm just going to do what I want, and I'm going to change my actions based on what choice you made. And that's how I teach boundaries to be vulnerable, connecting. Generous people use soft boundaries. Generous people don't need harder boundaries because they already know what they want and how to communicate it. They already know how to get what they want. They already know how to ask for what they want. Right? Do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, no, sorry. I had to turn off my camera because I had to ask my husband to turn down the volume on the television. He's like glued to the news right now.
I bet.
Um, so, and that's the thing about what I love about just the soft and the hard. I think the soft boundaries allow engagement, whereas the hard boundaries are saying the answer is no. Like I'm
Yes.
just saying the wall is there. You decide whether if you cross this boundary, we're done kind of
Yeah.
attitude. But
Yeah.
soft boundary, like you said, we're allowing people to, not so much that we're allowing them to do it in a way that I would say, doesn't have our best interests at heart, but it allows engagement, connection, talking about it, having conversations around
Yes.
different topics. I think that's the important part around setting boundaries. So if you're the person who thinks that you're being overly generous and you're feeling taken advantage of by other people, it's really about just a couple of things. It's like, one, are you truly giving without expecting anything in return? And number two, have you had the conversation with this other person, if you, or other people, if you feel that you're over giving where to the point where your well-being is being, I don't know if so much the word is threatened, but is not, you're not feeling good around it, and you haven't had that conversation, maybe that's something you need to think about, because again, people do not read minds. And if you allow, especially if it's bad behavior,
Yes.
whatever kind of behavior it is, the more you allow something, the more it becomes habit for another person. So especially if it's bad behavior, if you're allowing that to happen to you all the time, where you feel like this person or persons in your life are always crossing this, soft boundary where, you said, hey, look, this is my personal time that I want to do. For example, in the mornings I do my meditation. So if my husband kept coming barging in every morning during the time, and he knows that I'm meditating, and I've asked him, I've talked to him about it, and I said, hey, this is my time. Do you mind waiting to come and talk to me? And he's usually, I mean, even now, he knows I'm on this YouTube live. And so it's like, if he just kept doing it, and that would mean there needs to be more of a conversation
Yeah.
around it, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean the other person is necessarily wrong, but they're not getting it, they're not understanding. But it's our
Right.
responsibility, if we want something to be a certain way in our life, then we have to speak up about it. But
Right.
also making sure that if you are feeling like you're being taken advantage of, you either have to realize, really think about, are you coming from a place where if you're serving, you think that you're entitled to something in return?
Right.
Or if it's the person that is always crossing a specific, boundary with you, where they're
Yeah.
constantly, for example, you have a friend on the phone, and every time you get on the phone with this person, it's always talking about negative things, talking about how bad life is, and you try helping them and they don't seem to move forward. Then you have a conversation with them. Say, hey, like, having this conversation with them is really about saying, look, I get it. I know that you're coming from this place. You don't feel good. But we've had this conversation before, and we've talked about ways that you could actually facilitate change. And it doesn't appear that you're doing that. I just want to be able to help you to maybe see how we can start moving you in that direction, so that we can have more, have conversations where we're talking to each other, where it's, hey, how are
Right.
you doing? I'm great. Learning to be able to do it that way as well also shows the other person that you care. And
Yeah.
especially if you're that kind of person who is giving, it shows that you care, but it also shows that you care that they actually move forward. And if they don't seem to get it, then that's another conversation you can have, or you can even give them a time limit. Like, say, look, I'm going to allow you this space. We'll talk about it for 5 minutes, and then we're going to change the subject. Because sometimes some people just don't get it until they do,
Yeah.
until you've had multiple conversations. And again, it's just,
And sometimes you need a barrier.
and sometimes in those cases too, as Andy's saying, you'll need a barrier. And so it's really like, it just depends on what it is, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, I've had many of those relationships, and learned through over time, where I've felt myself that I've felt being taken advantage of. I've realized, because part of that is my responsibility, what I allow for myself, right? And
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
able to then say, okay,
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily have to be a barrier, but look, this is how I would like it to go. Let's see
Yeah.
if we can move you forward. And then if it becomes something that there's no change, then we're going to have these types of conversations. And this is the hard boundary, or sort of the barrier, or not necessarily to keep them away, but to keep that kind of energy, like to a minimum. And you decide. But it's
Yeah.
just really, but you have to have the conversations, because it doesn't happen by you just showing them you feel a certain way, or you ghosting them, or not even talking to them at all. or cutting them out of your life. That doesn't necessarily work. I think that all that does is just builds animosity from another person, where you could actually have a conversation that could help them be a better person, help
Yeah,
them understand, and have better relationships with other people in their lives. So it's just,
yeah,
if you're a generous person, then you know this already. So it's really like, what's your motivation for being generous to other people in your life? Is
yeah,
it all about you to get something in return, or are you really truly all about them with no expectation other than you feel good about supporting?
yeah, yeah. And that's really what it comes down to, is what kind of generosity are you talking about? What type of generous person are you talking about? Because a lot of generous people, a lot of people who classify themselves as generous, have this mindset that generosity is about giving to other people, but they don't have the other half of that, that is, generosity is giving from a full cup to other people, giving from my abundance, from my excess, from my overflow. Some people figure they have to be generous regardless of the cost to them. And that's when it becomes a question of being used, a question of getting something in return. I've given so much, I have nothing left. And that's the problem. If you're being so generous that you need in return, then look at your generosity, because it's not generosity unless you have it to give. The one thing that I have and have virtually always had access to give is love. It didn't matter what my financial situation was. It didn't matter what my emotional state was. It didn't matter what my physical conditions were, where I existed, who I was talking to. I always have, or almost always have had, an abundance of love. I could love somebody else. Sometimes I've had extra money. Sometimes I've had extra time. Sometimes I've had a lot of other things too. And sometimes I'll give of those things. And it took me a lot of years to figure out that I can only give of those things I have excess of. And if I don't have excess, it's not generosity anymore. Now it's just giving. And giving without giving from abundance is you offering up someone to use you. You're asking someone to use you, and you're hoping they'll be generous in return. And there's where the problem lies, is you're hoping they'll be generous in return, and not everybody is, because you've put up one set of rules as to how this is supposed to work, and not everybody lives by those rules. So oftentimes when that happens, we judge other people for living by the wrong set of rules, because they're not our rules. Whereas if we give from our abundance, from our generosity, from our excess, from our overflow, if we give from that place, then giving, for as far as consequences to me, is no different than throwing it off into the wind. Is no different than giving that abundance to just let it flow away with a river off into the ocean someplace. If my cup is full and overflowing, it's going to spill onto the floor, or I can give it to somebody. Right? I can share that with someone. But if I'm pouring out of my mostly empty cup, or even partially empty cup, it's not generosity anymore. Right?
Yeah. I love that too, because and you really are just talking about, you're either giving with a joyful heart, or you're giving with the, oh, I have to. There's the I want to, and then I have to. And so
Right.
the want to is the joyful, grateful, loving, heart that wants to give because you have so much extra. It's like your cup floweth over and you have so much to give. Whereas the other person who has depleted because they're not looking after themselves, they're allowing people to maybe take advantage of them, because that can happen because we
Yeah.
allow it, because we're not having the conversations. And maybe again, it could be because we're not really giving with a joyful heart. And so in those instances, you do become resentful. You can run down. You can actually start to feel, and getting into primal states of, anxious and stressed and sad and angry and all of
Yes.
those feelings that don't feel good. And so when you're giving, obviously, it's like I kind of like create this picture of, it's like having a present and you're giving it a present to someone, a gift, and you're like waiting for them to open it, and you can't wait to see their face when they open it, this gift that you're giving. That's kind of like what it is, of giving of yourself, of your time, of your, basically when you give of your time, I think it's probably one of the most valuable things that you can do, giving of
Yes.
your time, because time is such a valuable commodity. And you're giving of your time, but you're holding actual emotional space for someone else to share how they feel, whether they're in a grateful state of mind or they're not, because it could be that they need a shoulder to lean on. But it's like you're giving them a gift of your time and your energy, and of, just this emotional space. And that's what it means to have to give, like giving
Yeah.
that way, is because when your cup is overflowing, because you look after yourself, you do all of the things that you need for yourself, so you feel like you have the
Yeah.
energy, the mindset, and all of that. That's where you come from when you're giving. So generous people don't need stronger boundaries. Generous people just have the awareness that they've already taken care of, and they've filled their cup. They
Yes.
fill it daily. It's never going on empty. And when they find themselves depleting, they take a step back. They create that moment for
Yes.
themselves to fill their cup. And
Yes.
then they know they have the time, the space, the energy to do that. And so
Yes.
that's awareness around what generosity of giving of your time, your space, your energy, all of that. Again, if you are someone who's thinking that, well, I'm giving and people are taking and I'm just feeling it, then look at it from that perspective. Are you doing the things to fill your cup daily? Because that's something, it's important, and you heard self love probably like thrown around a lot, mindset work, all of these terms that you may have heard, not maybe fully understood, but you like gratitude, journaling, all of this stuff. You've
Right.
probably heard this thrown around, and you probably said, you know what, I'm sick and tired of hearing it. But let me just tell you from my own personal experience, from the people that I've worked with, my own marriage, my husband, even doing his own self development work, that when you start doing this and you lean into this type of a lifestyle change, because it's not about a one and done, but it's a lifestyle change, something you decided for yourself,
Yeah.
it makes such a difference in how you wake up every day. You have a
Yeah.
different mindset, a different way of looking at the world, a different
Yeah.
way of showing up in the world, a different way of when you are holding that space for someone
Yeah.
else. You're not looking at it from the, oh, what am I going to get out of it? It's, what can I do for you? How can I serve you? How can I show up as the best version of myself for you? And that is the generous heart who already has boundaries in place. It doesn't have to actually think about it. Do I have strong boundaries? They don't have to
Right.
think about it, because they already know this is a lifestyle that they've embraced.
Yeah.
And the person
Yeah.
who has to think about it needs to maybe look at their practices of self-care, and
Yeah.
make sure that they have something that's in place, that's non-negotiable, so that they fill their cup. So as Andy and I have been saying, is that you are giving from that generous place, so that you don't have to think about this person taking advantage of me, that person taking from me, because you have so much to give. It's like you're like, hey, let me hold the space for you. You won't even notice that you're giving of your time, because
That's
it
right.
doesn't become, oh, you don't become aware of it, because you have so much to give that it's just like you feel joyful to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I love this conversation, Andy.
Yeah. That's exactly it. It's about giving what you have left. And to address some of the things that you mentioned, we do talk about journaling and self-care, and meditation, and mindset, and emotional awareness, and or emotional intelligence, and we talk about there's a whole bunch of buzzwords in the coaching industry, and they're buzzwords for a reason, because those are the things that we use to fill up our cups. Now, I wanted to dig into that for just a little bit, the idea of filling up our cups, because a lot of people who are coming from this desperate place, or coming from this lack place, are looking at the people around them who are not filling up their cup for them. My employer isn't giving me a raise. My wife isn't giving me sex. My best friend isn't, you know, doing the things that we usually do together. He's got a new girlfriend, so we're not doing those things anymore. Whatever the case may be, you're not getting what you expected to get. And when we're talking about self care, when we're talking about meditation, when we're talking about journaling, you'll notice a theme. If you haven't noticed already, I'll tell you the theme. It's shit we can do ourselves that isn't somebody else's responsibility and doesn't require somebody else's input or permission. It's things that we can be 100% in control of. The reason so many people are running around with a half empty cup, or a cup that's honestly running on reserves, is because they're expecting somebody else to fill their cup up. They're expecting their employer to give them a raise, their wife to give them sex, their best friend to play video games with them. Well, we as long as somebody else has the responsibility for filling our cup up, our cup's never going to be full. And you're never going to be generous if your cup's not full. You're always going to be just simply giving, and giving of yourself, of those parts of yourself that you don't have to give. The time that you should be spending taking care of yourself, the money you should be spending providing for yourself, the energy you should be spending giving to yourself. Those things are what self-care is all about. All these buzzwords you hear about the coaching industry, that's where they come to. They focus on us first. And it's important that you hear this part, that it's us first, because we're all giving people. Coaches, the whole industry, we are generous people. We want to give. We want to give more than anything in the world. Most of us actually wouldn't fill up our cup if we didn't think we had to in order to give. Because most of us care less about ourselves than we do about other people. Most of us want to be generous. That's our driving force. And through a number of very difficult lessons, and each of us has our own version of difficult lessons, we've learned that if our cup ain't full, it ain't generosity. If we don't fill our own cup first, we're not helping anybody. So, what we've learned and what we're hoping to teach you is do the things for you that are 100% within your control that will fill your cup up. If your boss isn't giving you a raise, work harder, or go get a different job, or talk to your boss, see if he'll give you a raise, or talk to your spouse, or maybe you don't have a spouse. Change your lifestyle so you don't need as much money. Do something that's completely within your control. And when you do those things, you'll be surprised how fast your cup fills up. And when your cup is full, how you show up in the world with your generosity, how you give, you'll never feel used, and no one will ever judge you for what you're giving. It will be true generosity. It'll feel angelic. It'll feel just precious from a very heartfelt sense of the word.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think too, it's really understanding that it's a choice. You
It
get to
is.
you get to decide if
Yeah.
you are going to be a generous person that gives joyfully, or a generous person that's just giving and having your cup depleted, and you're resentful and you're angry and you're sad and you're irritated and you're depressed and you're blaming your lifestyle on other people. You talked about, just having, maybe you don't like the job you're working at, but maybe is it really the job, or is it maybe you're just not liking how you feel about yourself right now? And so
Right.
taking some time to reflect on who you're being, I think is really important. Who we're being in the world, how we show up every day. Are you showing up as the type of person that you would want to be around, right? I know this is a
Yes.
difficult question to answer, because sometimes we if we don't like ourselves, and we're really basically saying, you know what, if I knew you separately from you being me, I wouldn't want to hang around with you. So how does that make you feel, right? Because again, it's understanding that every choice that we make is the choice that we get to decide to make.
Yes.
And how we respond to other people, how we share, how we give, how we take. And it's up to us to decide if we're going to be happy or if we're not going to be happy. Because as Andy touched on, you can look to other people to fill your cup daily, to be the ones that help you be a better version of yourself so that you can give from a generous heart. But if you're not doing it equally for yourself, no matter how much they give, it might not, you might have the expectation around what you expect from it, like what you expect it to look like, your
Yeah.
boss giving you a raise. Instead of maybe giving you more training around a specific area to up level your skill set that would actually warrant getting a raise, to
Yeah.
having, like you're saying, your wife will give you sex. Well, maybe because you're not really being the nicest person to be around. Look at how
Right.
you are in the relationship,
Yeah.
and are you that would you want to be with you, and
Yeah.
how you are acting right now in your relationship. And if you look at it from that point of view, saying, you know what, if I want my wife to respond to me in that way, or my husband to respond to me that way, maybe it's doing the inner work to see who I'm being. Am I being that type
Yeah.
of person that they would want me to be around? Am I being physically and emotionally attractive to them? Especially the emotional part, because that will
Yeah.
draw them in.
Yeah.
And so when you look at it from those perspectives of, you have the ability to do the work to make the changes that you actually want to see. Isn't there a saying that to be the change in the
You
world
want
that
to
you
see
want to see? Something like
be
that?
the change you want to see in the world. Yes.
Right. So if there's something in your world that you want change, then be that change.
Yeah.
Show. Again, it's lead by example. If you
Yeah.
lead by example and show that, hey, I want to be that person that I want to be treated like.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be that person that is maybe saying, I want to be treated this way. Well, let me be that person that really actually warrants being treated that way. Because if I'm not being that person, but I'm demanding to be treated that way, to have my cup filled, to all of these things to come to me, to be giving with a generous heart.
Right.
Look within. Who are you being? I think
Yeah.
it really comes down to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And being generous to yourself. I mean, the first lesson of generosity is, can you freely give to yourself without consequences? Like, without judgment. I will give myself this 3-day weekend to sit by myself and read a book. And without judgment, without saying, there's so many things I should have been doing, or man, am I just being lazy? Oh, well, be generous to yourself. Let yourself have that thing. And while you're sitting there reading a book, open up a bowl of ice cream. See how that feels. You'll probably like it. Now, unless of course you have some problem with ice cream. I mean, I'm not suggesting you do that, but you get the idea. Like, give yourself something. Be generous to you. Give yourself something generous, right? I say that because my son can't have ice cream.
Poor guy.
But yes, that's the idea, right? Be generous to you first. As a matter of fact, you'll know what generosity feels like when you practice on you. When you give to you and you don't care if you like it or not. Sit down and read a book for a 3-day weekend and decide, oh, I didn't like that. Maybe I'll do something different next time. Fine, great. It's not what time wasted. You figured out what you like, right? Maybe you didn't like reading a book, but at least now you know what you don't like doing,
Yeah.
right? So next time, try playing video games or going skiing or hanging out with your best friend or your wife or your husband. Like, do something just generously, just to figure out if that's what you like or not. It's not a waste if you. It's not even a waste if you don't like it, because quite honestly, now you know what you don't like, and that's a lesson. That's valuable. Be generous without judgment to
Yeah.
you first.
Absolutely. And that's what how I train my clients is like, put yourself on the top of your VIP list. Literally above your husband, above your kids, and especially in your relationships. You first. because
Yep.
when you do that, they are going to get the benefits of you being the best version of you, showing up for you for number one, but also you show up as the best version of yourself for them. And so they reap the benefits of you filling your cup.
Yeah.
They want to be around you. You have better communication. You have a better relationship in how you guys interact with each other. When you learn to communicate your needs and you allow them to hold that, that that you give them the space to communicate their needs too without
Yes.
judgment or criticism, and just creating those bonds within your own family dynamic, and again, even with your even in your job, you know your boss, especially if you've been there for a while, may not know that you have specific feelings around certain things or ideas,
Yeah.
unless you speak up. Because if you can be an add, like a culture add to your company, or add something of value to your company, which would actually help the company, wouldn't that be a great thing to share with your boss? Now, if they're not the type of people that are with a growth mindset, okay,
Lots
but
aren't.
you
Some
know,
are.
some aren't, and some are, exactly. But at least you know, right? You know
Yeah.
where you stand, and at least you will have spoken up. And of course, you want to make sure that you do this in a way that you're not going in and demanding, because again, it's not about demanding; it's about sharing perspectives. That's it.
It's about being generous.
Yeah, generously giving.
Yeah. Being
Yeah,
generous. Now, that doesn't mean you can't ask for what you want,
exactly.
but asking for what you want is separate from giving from your overflow.
Hmm.
You give and you ask, but you don't stop giving if they say no. You give, and on a separate plane, a separate experience, you just ask. They're not related. They don't have to be related.
Yeah. And you're going to hear the word no a lot in your life. By the way, by the time you're 5 years old, I think they said like the metrics were like 40,000 no's by the time you're five. So imagine now, however old
I
you
had
are,
to I had to have been 100,000 because I did everything.
right? So we get no's. We get no's in
Yeah.
life, but we also get a lot of yeses. We also get a lot of maybes. We also get the ability to grow and learn about ourselves. Like Andy said, if you read a book this weekend, if it's like if you take a day and you read a book and you're like, yeah, no, it's not for me. Maybe you like to learn more about yourself.
Maybe there's something else that you like. Maybe there's something different that you want to do. Maybe there's a different experience you'll want to try. Yeah, that's exactly what it's about. It's about learning about yourself. It's about giving to yourself. It's about learning how to give to yourself. And by learning how to give to yourself, you learn um, how to give to others. You learn what generosity feels like from both sides. You learn. We have Leslie and I both have learned what generosity feels like. Like when her screen froze and she's making this funny face. Um, I picked up on that and generously just decided to keep giving because you guys want what we're giving you. You want to hear what we have, and we're giving it generously just because we can, just because that's what we have.
Hi there. Oh, I just love tech.
So you
Okay.
should watch the last couple minutes of that video and see the face that you left for us.
Oh, lovely. Isn't that wonderful? So
it
anyhow,
was it was a wonderful face. I loved it.
I'm sure it was, but so really all I was just trying to say is, it's about being the best version of you. You have the choice to make. You can decide how you show up in the world. It's up to you. It's a choice that you're given. And one of the things I'd love to leave you with is this. There's this whole metric around tracking the value on worthiness of being worthy of something or not being worthy of something. And I talk to a lot of women in my Facebook groups and women that I work with, and we talk about this because I truly believe that worth is not based on any value system that anyone could present to you. Like, there's nobody in this world that could present a value system to you that means anything at all, that holds any truth to it except one. And I truly believe that my value system that I'm going to give you is the one that actually can prove your worth. And that is, when you were before you were conceived, you were in your mom's womb waiting to be conceived. you were chosen to be fertilized, and then you grew in your mom's womb, and then you were born. So right there, that's the only value system on your worth, is that you were actually chosen out of all of those choices to be the one to be brought into this world. So that is, to me, worthiness. So because of that, I believe you have a responsibility to yourself to show up in this world as the best version of you, because you're given the gift of life every single day. And how
Yeah.
you show up in it every single day is up to you. And so, again, giving with a generous heart, or giving because you think it's just giving and you have to, and you're depleting yourself and you're starting to feel the effects of it, both emotionally and physically. So, again, it's really about learning that you're important, and how can you make your life better by leaning into those things. So, we are at the
Exactly.
top of the hour. Oh my gosh. And of course, we had a
Who knew
couple
we could
of,
fill up an hour?
I know, and we had a couple of little hiccups again. I have no
We're
control
going
over
to.
internet, but guys, I hope you got the point of what we were trying to say today. It's really just, boundaries are meant to really just create that space that you create for yourself, so that you protect your emotional space, but also making sure that your boundaries are meant to allow for inclusion in others. So how
Yeah.
they decide how they want to treat you based on the boundaries that you created, and Andy taught me that one, or you, and also how you also honor your own,
Yes. Yeah.
and really, self-care. I think one of the most important things that you can do for yourself, the gift that you can give to yourself every day, is to have non-negotiable time for you, whether it's playing video games, whether it's going for a walk, listening to your favorite podcast, or listening to audiobook, whether it's having a bubble bath in the middle of the day with a sign on the door, do not disturb, whether it's
Been
going
there.
in, if yeah, if whether it's going, you know what, I want ice cream in the middle of the day, just doesn't make sense. And maybe you want to have breakfast for dinner. Whatever that looks like for you, that makes you feel good,
Yeah.
you fill your cup every single day. Make this a lifestyle change for you, and you allow yourself to really come from a generous heart when you are providing space for other people. And you will find that you will not be looking at, oh, do I have the right boundaries in place? Because you will
That's
have
right.
already adopted that as your way of life. So
Yeah.
I'm so excited that we got to fill this space. Yeah, this has been really a great conversation. I appreciate it so much, Andy. As always, great topic. Looking forward to next week.
Me too. Me too.
I'm
These just,
excited.
we're getting some good conversations this
Yeah,
year. I'm really excited to see where we're
yeah,
going.
definitely. So I hope that you guys got value from this. If you have any comments, please share them below. Anything you want us to talk about, maybe revisit, please comment below, and like and subscribe. Share it to your friends. Get the word out there. Not necessarily because we want to grow the channel. No, we want to get the word out there. So because
Yeah.
there's people that need to hear these conversations, that
Yes.
maybe they're in the middle of turmoil, or they're in the middle of thinking right now that they're giving with so much generosity and not getting anything in return. Maybe they need to hear
Right.
today's conversation.
Yes, that's true. Very much. Yes. Give us a like, give us a share us around, comment, let us know, interact. We're here for you. And we'll see you next week on next week's video.
Yeah. Bye, guys.
Bye bye.